Test, test. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, perfect. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing the audio. looks like we're a bit of a smaller party. See, it's one person here. I hope you'll enjoy the demo regardless. I'll start in just a bit. Alright, I'm gonna kick it off. So, welcome to this presentation. I want to talk a bit about sort of my journey as an artist and things that I think can help you, hopefully, as you go through your journey as being an artist, and things I learned along the way, and some of the mistakes I made, and the crossroads I came to, and eventually had to make some decisions. So, whether you're an existing professional, or you worked for, or you just maybe got your job, you're just starting your art career, or you worked for a while, regardless, I hope there'll be some value in this presentation for you. I want to start with, very briefly, giving a bit of background. I love reading. I read a book every week. Sometimes it's on business related things, leadership things. Otherwise, it's just fiction, but I really love reading and I try to do it. Try to finish one a week. I love gaming as well. I've played games ever since I was a kid, and I try to keep it up as much as I can. It's gotten harder over the years, but I really love games. I'm currently creative director and founder of Envar, which is one of the biggest outsourced studio in Sweden with focus on concept art and illustration. I have a very lazy cat who lives with me in my family. He does not do much other than consider playtime the highest priority during the day, all the time when he's not sleeping. I always share some of the work I've done. I spent most of my professional career working at Riot Games, both doing illustrations on League of Legends, but also for Valorant. I joined Valorant pretty early in the production. I'll dive a bit deeper into that later on. But it was a really great experience to take that project from start to finish. I spent about 6.5 years with Riot, which was a really wonderful experience. And in my free time, I love to do personal work. My personal favorite type of work is slice of life. I just like to focus on a bit more regular things, the everyday to day stuff, with a bit more relaxed feel to it. And a bit looser work that I just really enjoy drawing. But when I first started, I've been working for almost, I'd say, 10 years now. And I think it was around when I think I was 20 when I first started. But back then, I sort of didn't know what to do in life. And my sister, who is 10 years older than me, works within the field of law. And I thought maybe that could be something for me. So I also enrolled in a law program, and very early on, I sort of realized this was really not my thing. The one of the teachers was great, but the other two was really hard for me to follow along, and the subject matter didn't quite interest me. So what I found myself doing after a while is like I started just doing doodles in my sketchbook. And I didn't know how to draw at all, but these doodles, I had a lot of fun with it, And over the course of a period of time, I realized that I really enjoy the act of drawing. I was pretty terrible at it. I just didn't know how to draw anything, but just the motion of drawing, and you move your hand on a piece of paper, something comes out of it. It was just something I thought was super super fun. So what I wanted to do, or what occurred to me, is like, is there a chance to pursue this as a career of sorts? Can I somehow make a living of just drawing? Because this was back in like 2010, I think it was. where I didn't know anything. I love playing games, but I didn't know that there was like a whole industry where you draw for games or you illustrate for games. I just knew that if there is a way to draw for a living, I want to be able to do it. But I knew that I also had to improve my skill set because I was pretty bad at it. So I started practicing as much as I could from whatever resources I could. Back then, getting tutorials and online material was really difficult. Buying some tutorials were pretty pricey. I remember some of the first ones I bought. It was like a 6-hour tutorial by some artist who were working in the field, and it was like you just lay down on your couch, you grab your popcorn, and you just like it's like a very long movie that you could enjoy. But it was super fun, and I learned a lot from them. But I started practicing drawing, try to find whatever information I could, and I sort of set out on the journey to try and become an artist. And this is one that we all go through, and this journey, I don't think it ever really ends. No matter what stage you're in your career, how old you are, there's a lot of turns and twists. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down, sometimes it goes backwards, sometimes it goes forward. And I think sort of regardless of where you are in your career, this road and this journey never quite end. Um, but the things I found along the way is like it's just really important, especially when you are like a concept artist or illustrator, is to always maintain the joy in the craft. Because especially for artists, when you're happy and you really enjoy what you do, the work will be so incredible. It's just like a whole nother level. And vice versa. If you're not too satisfied with it, it will reflect as well in the work. And I remember for me, it's like I always love painting. It's never changed, and it's something I always try to hold on to as I go through the journey. And it's something I strongly recommend for you as well. Like sometimes there are going to be maybe difficult feedback or a really tight deadline or whatever it may be. It's like always try to hold on to the joy as you go through some of the turns of the journey. Because I think drawing in the entertainment industry is just so fun. But I think the one thing that is really important and something I sort of stumbled on a bit early is that having a clear goal of what you want to accomplish as an artist, because that makes it a lot easier when as you go through this journey. It's like you know where you're going, and it doesn't have to be super precise. Like I said, when I first started drawing, my only goal was that I want to draw for a living. I want to be able to somehow come into work, and my work involves just around drawing for about 8 hours, and I can go home and I can draw some more at home, but I will make a living of just drawing. And that was my goal. This is the first thing that I sort of decided on pretty early, because every time I was making choices or thinking about things, this was always in the forefront of my mind. And every time I made a decision, I always wanted to find a way that it would help me get closer to this. And throughout my journey, having a clear goal has always been really helpful. And sometimes it's okay if it's a pretty broad goal, like I want to draw for a living. And sometimes it's okay if it's also more specific ones. I think also you can go even further in terms of yearly goal, 5-year goal, or lifelong goals. There's many different ways to approach it, but I strongly recommend always thinking about that as you go through your journey. Uh, and so I started I started practicing drawing, and I ended up getting an internship at a commercial agency in Stockholm about a year and a half into my journey of learning how to draw and paint. And back then, I thought art or drawing could sort of fit into ads, which it can to a degree. Show some examples, but it wasn't quite what I was thinking. And I remember when I started this internship, it was basically like the role was like an office assistant where you do everything to keep the agency going. The team was around 20 people, but Monday morning, I always buy breakfast for the team. And they had this old school type of coffee machine where with filter and stuff, I always made sure it was fresh, so everybody working there could get fresh coffee. Um, I would do whatever errands they needed. I would greet customers. And whenever we have customers over in the meeting rooms, I always used to buy pastries, but I always used to set the table in specific patterns because I just thought it was visually appealing. And I remember one of my coworkers told me it's kind of pointless because we're just gonna eat it and ruin it anyway. But to me, there was a satisfaction in just having a pattern on the table. So when you come in there, it's sort of like a nice presentation. Uh, but aside from doing those roles, I also worked. I got the chance to do some illustration. I got to do an ad for I think it was Snickers for a Swedish magazine thing. Pretty minor illustration. But I also got to do storyboarding, so I sort of got a taste of everything while keeping the office sort of going through the day to day. And what I realized while working at the commercial agency is that the type of art that they were needing, this is some art that I came across from typical advertising art in Sweden. It wasn't quite what I was thinking because I like when you push ideas, you do crazy things, and just colors and composition and stuff. And back then, I sort of felt that while there's a bit of drawing, it doesn't quite hit the itch for me of what I was hoping for. And eventually I found out that the games industry, that's where you push all the colors and you really do a lot of fun ideas. So I sort of knew that my goal became it sort of like moved from drawing for a living to wanting to draw in games, which was like a more specific target. And so I started practicing to reach that. And I think this is also really important. If you're maybe in the start of your own journey, is trying to understand what is the difference between games, advertising, and even films. Even with an art now, there's so many subcategories. You can go into super realistic, like for for feature films, for games that push the next gen, like Last of Us, where you push the realism as much as you can. Or we can go on the route of where it's more stylized, is trying to maintain a more artistic voice into the work. And knowing where you want to go, and this is hard, I think the more digging you do, the more you're going to find out, this is the thing I like, this is the thing I want to get into, or maybe this is the thing I'm not quite interested in. But the more you dig, the more you understand it, and I think knowing where exactly you want to go is going to make it easier getting there. So I sort of knew I wanted to work in games, and I ended up applying to two different companies. One was Gameloft, and one was Atom Hawk, which was an outdoor studio in the UK. And I remember when I first applied to Gameloft, I they liked the work, but they wanted me to do a test, which I did. Uh, and I sent in the test, and I got accepted. And just as I was about reading through the contract work, Atom Hawk got back to me. It's like 3 weeks later, and they said like, "Hey, we love your work, but we kind of want to do a test." And at that point, I said, I applied to another studio. I already did a test and I passed, but Atom Hawk was my main option. But I didn't want to do another test. They're like, "Okay, you can join us without a test." So I decided to go with Atom Hawk. I packed my bag. I moved from Stockholm to the north of England. And I started my very first job working in the industry. And what I want to touch on is like, especially if you are maybe a bit new maybe in the start of your career, uh, is what what kind of portfolio do you need to get that first job? I think there is. I'm sure throughout this convention, Lightbox, there is so many different ideas and takes. I'd love to share some things that I hope can help you to get that first job. But one thing I noticed as well is like I was trying to dig up my portfolio from like was it 10 years ago? But the page was down and I couldn't track down all the work. But over the years, the quality bar is going up for what you want to see on an entry portfolio. I mean, if you go back like 10 years and look at the concept art, I'll show you something that was done for. I can show you. It's here. This is one of the concepts that survived from back in the day, where I did it for. This is for Injustice Gods Among Us. It's like a map where it's like a fighting game from NetherRealm. But uh, if you go back like 10 years, the type of quality for official work was very different. And each year, it's the bar sort of goes up and up and up. Uh, and I think there's a few things you can think about to really sort of increase your own chances in landing that first gig. And the one thing that I think is really, really going to make a difference is having really strong fundamentals. And one thing I've seen quite a lot, because now with the studio I review so many portfolios, is that sometimes trying to make a portfolio piece when there are some gaps in maybe the knowledge in how to execute upon an image, the image isn't going to be as strong. And taking that extra time to maybe iron out the understanding of perspective or how to sculpt the form or how to render the light or whatever it may be, pushing off making that portfolio piece and just leveling up on the fundamentals is going to make you that much stronger of an artist. It's something I always recommend whenever I see that in work. It is the greatest chance to really level up your work as a whole. So that is one of the main things I believe is really, really important. I think also the second thing that is kind of key is trying to target the studio knowing where you want to work. One of the mistakes I did, like when I was first applying, prior to getting an acceptance letter, is I sent off a generic portfolio everywhere, hoping against all odds that someone would be like, yes, this is it. But the work wasn't really great, and it was very bland and random applications everywhere. And I over since I worked at Riot, I've seen a lot more people getting picked up, and I saw one thing that was kind of common is that people specifically target Riot with their portfolio. You know, you maybe redesign existing champions, you push the quality bar on something that was launched that's maybe a bit dated. But really building a portfolio towards the studio, like maybe towards what we do is like just knowing where you want to apply and building almost a full portfolio around it. It's a bigger investment and it comes with a bit of risk because if it doesn't work out, maybe it's not as good portfolio towards another studio. But I do believe it'll make the portfolio stand out more, and it could really increase the chances of helping you get through the interview stage at least, and maybe getting the job. Um, and I think the last thing, which is super important, is in many cases you're never going to be able to be there to talk to someone about the work. Unless you make it to the interview stage, it's like the portfolio need to do all the talking for you. And having it set up in a way that so when someone looks at it, they can say like, hey, okay, this person really loves characters, and I see they're particularly interested in fantasy. They can also do props, but characters is their forte, is where they're really good at, and that's what they like. And that is really important, I think, because having a portfolio that covers everything might work if you're applying for a smaller studio, but the bigger ones, you sort of need to be a bit more specific. I remember a mistake I made when I applied, because I knew that Atom Hawk was an outsourced studio, so they kind of do everything. So I kind of put everything in my portfolio, and I put in storyboarding, which I'm not not fan of. I just don't enjoy it personally. But I've seen so many beautiful frames. I just don't think I can do it, and I don't think it's that fun for me. But at the time, I was like, yeah, it would be great if I put it in my portfolio. It shows I can do it. And when they saw it, they're like, oh, this guy likes storyboarding. He has it in his portfolio. Let's give him some storyboarding work. And I ended up doing storyboarding, I think, for like 2 months, which, yeah. don't put things in your portfolio you don't want to work on. I think the best way to think about it is like, imagine like what you have in your portfolio is all the work you're going to be doing. It's a kind of great bar of like, could you see yourself doing this specific thing? If yes, put it in the portfolio. So these are things that I think can really help increase the chances of you getting that ideal job you're looking for, and just making your portfolio stand out just a bit more. Because for like the larger companies, there's a lot of people applying and there's a lot of competition. So whatever you can get to get that extra edge, I would strongly suggest take whatever you can to make that happen. But after a year, I decided to pursue a freelance career. I worked with Riot for 1 year, and then I moved back to Sweden, and I had two main freelance clients. I was working for Cyber Agent, which is a Japanese company making card games. I don't know what they do nowadays, but back then they were making. Everybody was making illustrations for them that would be in the card games that people would play. And Cloud Imperium, which is the Star Citizens franchise. I'm also not up to date if they are making something new, but back then they were developing their main game. And for me, this was the first time I went freelance. I don't know if anyone here is freelance, but I'd love to share some stuff that could help, or maybe some of my own failures that, that happened during this time. Because when you're a freelance, like you're your own boss, you do your own schedule, everything is on you. And it comes with a lot of freedom, but also a lot of responsibility. And I think one of the biggest things is knowing what do you choose. Like sometimes you might have more than one option. Which ones do you go with? How do you balance that? Um, and I think the sort of fear that many who enter the freelance job, which was the same for me, is that you take on too much. You're like, I'll take on everything because just in case nothing comes after this, because you just don't know what's down the line, especially if it's like maybe it's like a smaller developer, or maybe it's just one illustration for a company. I ended up sometimes taking on too much because I couldn't really pick and choose, and I don't know quite what is the best way to approach this. I think a way that I would advise now, looking back at this, is when you're about to take on a possible freelance job, try to talk to the employer and like see how big of a commitment are they looking from you. Is it like a month worth of work, 2 months worth of work? Then you know that. So when someone reaches out to you while you're working on that project, you can tell them, hey, my schedule opened up at this date. So you can sort of like line things up if possible, if everything aligns. And try not to just take them all because the fear of missing out. Something I did which I do not recommend. And so during my freelance time, I was working for Applebot, and I was doing a lot of these card illustrations. And it was like the sci-fi world, and I think back then, you never really got a design to follow. You had to design and illustrate at the same time, which makes it pretty hard, to me at least. But some of the work I did, the one thing I was never too keen on is most of the feedback was just add more detail to the images. And if you look at these, like there's just noise everywhere, which I don't think makes an appealing image, which is one of the reasons why I decided to stop working with one of the companies, because it was pushing my work in a direction which I wasn't too excited about. But you see, it's also like a bit of a darker, a bit more grim, more serious work. They're looking super cool, the characters. You even have a bit of a lens flare in the eye. And in general, a lot of my work had more of a serious feel to it, which was like, because I was doing that type of work, it sort of led to more type of work like that, and so on and so on. And so I sort of was stuck, and this was for Star Citizen. I sort of was stuck in this loop where all the work I did had a serious feel to it, and I wasn't too excited about that. It felt more that something I fell into more than it was something I was excited by. And since the fact I was freelancing, I was sort of finding myself at a crossroad, because while I had work doing this type of things, it wasn't quite what I was really into or excited by. I love my craft for image making has never changed, but the particular way of doing images like this, it gets a bit depressing when it's so dark all the time. If you play Dark Souls or Bloodborne, doing them there's only so much you can handle of that, and it sort of became same for me at least for me in this type of art, that it was just too gloomy. And so I wasn't sure what to do. And I think this is sometimes, I've seen this happen to other artists as well, where you sort of need to reinvent yourself. You need to rebrand yourself of the type of work you do, because as a general rule of thumb, the type of work you're doing is the kind of work you'll be hired to do. And since I wanted to change out from this, I sort of had to like rebuild my portfolio and the work I was doing. And one of the first things I looked at was to trim down on a lot of the brushes I was using. I had like hundreds of brushes. And I never felt that, I didn't use like 95% of them. But trimming that down helped also uh, make me more effective when I was painting. Because most of the time, sometimes I just spent searching for the brush that I liked once, but I could I could never find the labyrinth of brushes. So that was one of the first thing I did. But I also started doing a lot more personal work, and this is one of the best advice I can really give any artist is draw as much as you can for yourself, because doing personal work is the biggest room for growth, because having the freedom of experimenting, trying things out, and failing is so critical that when you work in a commercial setting, it's much harder to do that. It's much harder to take a risk on an approach or a solution, because usually you have a deadline coming up and you really don't want to jeopardize that. So you, usually what ends up happening is whenever you work as an artist, it's like you tend to go the safe route at work. Sometimes you can experiment maybe with a few things, but you're not going to do a 180 experimentation. But that is so important to do that. And that's why personal work is so key, because it's like your own playground where you can do whatever you want. If the painting utterly fails, no one's going to judge you. You had probably a great time painting it, or maybe not a great time, depending on how big how unhappy you are with it. But regardless, it's something you probably can take away from it anyway. Like maybe the approach was not working at all. So imagine if you don't know the commercial piece, you probably would have made it a very stressful situation. That's why I think personal work is key to really growing as an artist, in my opinion. And I remember back in the day when I was freelancing, there was a bunch of us artist friends who were also freelancing, but everybody felt the same where none of us was doing personal work. And for the exact reason that we wanted to, maybe they weren't at a crossroad like I was feeling, but they wanted to try stuff out. They wanted to learn new methods. And so what we did was we sort of came together. I think at total we were 10 people in the chat or the group, but average maybe 5 to 6 were participating in each round, depending on deadlines and other things. But what was cool was that each month we would give each other a topic. This is one of these paintings, where I was still in like my serious style, where it has to look cool and very badass and as realistic as I could paint it. But each month we'd get a topic. We vote on a topic together, and based on that topic, it's 100% open to you, however you want to interpret it, which I thought was so cool. The only rule really was you cannot show anyone in the group work in progress. And the reason for that is to avoid influencing each other. And I always loved that last day when we were sharing the images, because everybody interpreted in so many different ways. It was just amazing to see. And I remember after making this specific image, I felt that for next time I'm gonna try to reinvent my style completely. Because of the crossroad thing, this was like the chance to really try and do something I've never done before. And I love animation, and not so much about drawing anime characters, but more the stylization of the backgrounds, the feel of it, the colors. It has such a wonderful vibe that I personally really enjoy. And I wanted to see, can I in my own way pull some of that inspiration, some of those flavors in my own craft in a brand new painting. And because I had a month to experiment, I tried a bunch of different things. And even if it failed, it didn't matter. I didn't need to post it. There was no need to post it, so that was okay. And it was really a great experience because making this image was probably one of my biggest personal breakthroughs as an artist because it truly showed me something that I was sort of searching for a long time in my own work that I really wanted to do better and learn. And this one was super fun. It sort of unlocked um, another version of myself as an artist that I was searching for a long time because as I said earlier, I was sort of stuck doing this gloomy thing, even though this one is a bit like, it's nighttime and stuff, but it still has a more stylized look. It's not so much as the realism as the previous work, which I was super excited by. And this eventually led to more stylized work, and even more stylized work. This is where I'm at sort of today with my own work. And I think one thing that is really important for us as artists that I sort of noticed over the years is that um, it's so key to keep trying to experiment, find new ways of expressing yourself, and not fall into this path of approaching an image the same way every single time, which I think could easily happen. Happened to me a few times and I just forcefully have to no, try a different approach. You cannot use a safe method for this, not in your free time. That is saved for work when you need to make sure the image works. But free time, it's really important to just try and reinvent and experiment. And I think particularly for me working on Valorant, where it was more of a graphical look, it became much closer to my personal work, and I think they sort of affected each other in the end, which was really fun. But as I was freelancing, I came across Riot as well as one of my freelance clients. And I remember when I first started my contract with them, it was meant to be 65 working days. Usually, when you work with certain companies, I know particularly for Riot back then, I don't know how it is now, they tend to want to do a shorter contract to see how things are going because it's really important to be able to work together because feedback and everything. And for me back then, we started off 65 days, and I started on the project called Ares back then, but it ended up being Valorant, which we launched, which I'll talk about in a bit. And it was super early. I think the team was 10 people. At that time, the project just had placeholder assets. And I just never forget the feeling of how fun the game was, even with all the placeholder assets. And there was no art in game to be seen, but it was still really fun. And those 65 days ended up being 6.5 years working with that team. And during my time on Valorant, I did everything from I started off doing environment art, then I transitioned over to try and figure out some of the characters. Illustration became one of my bigger passions, where I really wanted to figure out how do we find a new brand identity for what Valorant could look like. Because we really needed to find something that made Valorant feel different from League of Legends. Because we were going to have promotional work, but we didn't want to paint it the way Splash does, because that is League of Legends' unique identity. And Valorant on its own has its own brand and feel, and we really wanted to find something that was ours. And through a lot of exploration, a lot of back and forth, with a lot of collaboration from our internal team, we sort of ended up with a very cool graphical look that I was pretty excited by. And it sort of matched pretty well with the feel of the brand, fresh, new, and we worked with a lot of graphical design. When we did the key art, we would illustrate the characters, and then we have our graphic designer do the cool text behind it, which looks super dope. And it was just a really fun collaboration to find that voice for that project. And seeing it reach the finish line was really cool. And this was my last illustration that I did before I ended up switching. And I also spent a year with League of Legends. I did several splashes, and it was a truly amazing experience working with that team. I learned every day almost felt like you're just coming there to just soak up all the knowledge and just learn, because everybody's doing these crazy illustration and so many different approaches, and it was truly wonderful experience. I'll never forget it. A year of just soaking up knowledge and learning, and this particular image was my last with the Splash team. I remember when we did this because this was like the big beat for the end of the year. And we sort of got together in this room, all of the illustrators, and it almost felt like just a bunch of friends sketching and drawing together. We had to figure out the thumbnail. Everybody sketched on everything, and it was so fun. And I think the illustration all turned out really cool as a cohesive experience. So that was super fun. And one thing I'd love to share that I found over the course of the years, I sort of picked it up when I was working in LA a few years ago, is trying to manage your time. And this is something I always like to pitch. I'm super passionate about time management, and you're like managing your own time, and trying to see how can you maximize it the most. And every time I pitch this to someone, they always feel like it's too much. So I just want to pitch it to you all, and just if give it a try at least, and see how you feel about it. So what I do is, this is like from this week. I have a bit of more work today and tomorrow, so probably going to end about 80 hours in total. But what I like to do is, I started this a few years ago. Actually, my wife recommended it to me because I felt that I was drawing more than I actually were. So what you do with this program is, like, you type in the project, and you start a timer. You have to be honest with yourself. Yeah. Otherwise it doesn't work. Yeah, so you start a timer, and as you're working, when you're done, you just stop the timer. And at the end of the week, you get a summary of your whole week. So it says this is how much time you worked, and this is how we will split on different things. And I remember first time doing this, I was just shocked how little I spent on certain things. And it gave me such a reality check, because even if you're a student, I really recommend this, even though it can feel a bit too much. I think if you really want to maximize your time, this is the best tool I can possibly suggest, because it gives you an objective view of how you're spending your time. And for instance, for me, I don't track family time or when I play games. This is purely like work-related things, and trying health, and trying to improve as a person. Everything else doesn't count. These are just the things I track. You can track whatever you want to track. But for me, I got to see, like, okay, this thing is supposedly really important to me. Why am I not spending more time on it? And then next week I could do some adjustments to try and spend the time more effectively. And it's a tool I've used now for such a long time. I absolutely love it. I'd say I'm almost hooked on it. You don't have to use Toggle. Toggle is free. That's why I like using it. I'm sure there's many other options, but it is great to use. And this is roughly how I break down my week. Company management is pretty much everything related to the studio. I just don't like to break it down into smaller pieces. And just health and fitness and self-improvement, which usually tends to be reading or trying to learn new things. Cool. So we launched Valorant on 2nd of June, after 5.5 years, I think? Yeah, 5.5 years working on that project. We finally launched it. It was during the pandemic last year. The whole team put in such an amazing effort, and it was such a surreal experience to see how much people enjoyed it, because at that time as well, everybody was sort of stuck at home. It was just really not fun for anyone. But being able to share this with players and everyone was it felt like something a lot of people needed. Our team needed it to get the game out. People were stuck at home, needed something to sort of occupy themselves so you don't sort of go crazy. And it was such a experience I'll probably never forget. But after launching Valorant, which I told my wife that I just have to launch Valorant. I don't want to think about anything other than Valorant. The game needs to come out. I want to be there. It is critical to me. Maybe it's a bit like, when you spend so much time on something, you sort of don't want to let it go. But it was very important for me to see the project to the finish line. But after we launched the project, I sort of came to a crossroad once more, where I knew that I could keep working at Riot. I really love the team on Valorant, or I could switch to the League of Legends teams doing splash art. I really enjoyed that as well. Um, but I started thinking again, like what is important to me, and what is my goal? Because if you think about the compass we had earlier, this is something that I strongly advise anyone as you go through your own journey. Always try to think about it, keep it up to date, with a new map, maybe a new destination, and try not to forget about it. Because I knew that to keep following the map that's important for me, I knew that I needed to take another path than Riot. Even though I love the team, I knew that there was something that was really important for me that I wanted to try first. So I decided to leave Riot after 6.5 years. It was a very difficult choice, but I decided to leave, move back to Sweden to open up my own team and my own studio. And we are called Envar. Uh, and when I first started, we officially opened our door 16th of November, I think it was. And I had just hired my producer, and we were able to hire two more artists shortly after. And today we are 28 people working here, and I am super super proud of our whole team and all of our artists working here. And I just want to share a bit of work that we do today. Um, because one of the things that was really important with the studio is I learned so much at Riot, and I wanted to take a lot of that knowledge and build my own team with a lot of the core values in particular, especially the illustration team, where the aspect of collaboration. Also on Valorant, we did the key art, and this is one of the illustration where we did for Riot that I feel like embeds a lot of things that I feel is important in sense of collaboration and really helping each other's strengths as artists. And this illustration in particular, we never done anything like this before, so we're very happy that they trusted us with this. But it was we had about 80 days to finish this image, but we had 40 days on the deadline. So roughly we had three people working on this at all times. Sometimes we even had five people working on this at all times. So it was truly a crazy experience, and I think the end result ended up with something I feel just super proud of because the team did such a crazy great work with it. And we're all really happy to see when it finally came out. And we also do some other illustration. This is from smaller collaboration. One of our amazing illustrators, Dawn, did this wonderful piece. And this is another one we did for Legend of Runeterra. It was a bigger collaboration that we worked on between several of our illustrators. And I want to add a bonus as well because I can't share too much work. Most of it is still NDA, but this is something that we're working on internally, and we sort of see where that goes. Exclusive for Lightbox. We'll see if we share this beyond this. And I think the last thing I want to sort of as we get ready to wrap up is where are you on your own journey? And sort of like where is your compass leading you? And try always to, remember to have fun, even though sometimes it might be a bit stressful. Think about your goals. Think about how do you update them. For me, I have short-term goals. I have mid-tier, like where it's like 5 years away, and then there's like a lifelong goal as well. Um, and I think this picture is hilarious. I think it's so funny. It might be ridiculous, but I just think it's just great. Because I think no matter whatever your goal is, like with if you work hard like this person here, with the weights on the pen, do the reps, you're gonna get wherever your journey is gonna take you, or where you want your journey to take you. Thank you so much, everyone. We have a bit of time left, so if anyone has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer it. saw there was one question on how do you keep collaboration pieces coherent? Uh, and basically, what we did for we can go back to it. Uh, what we did was we had one of our illustrators establish a style. We actually picked Senna to be the benchmark, and then it became easier for everybody else to see, because as we were doing this piece, if you look at the shadow, it's a bit more graphical, and we sort of had to we needed to find a style that worked for this piece. It wasn't just rendering it, because when we got the references, there was two different directions. It was based on some cinematics they were going to launch at the same time. So we sort of had to discover a style that was going to be cohesive for the piece. And when we set the bar for one of them, it became easier for the rest of the team to match that. Thanks everybody for listening. There's some more questions. How do you know when you're ready to apply for jobs? I think this one is a great question. I think you can always try. I think as long as whenever when you don't hear back, either the work obviously isn't up to par, but it could be also that it's just not matching for their project. But I think what I would propose is that at least the method I did, I applied to, because I think before I got hired, I applied to a bunch of jobs. I never heard back from anyone, and to me, I took it as a sign that the quality bar isn't there. So I took some time, I grinded some more, and then I tried applying again, and that's when I heard back. So for me, looking back, it was like, okay, the bar wasn't just there, but it's hard to tell unless you apply and see. What you can do as well is if you don't hear back or you get a negative, maybe you can ask for why. And if you can get that, that would be amazing to understand like how to level up. Some more question here. What were you using for study resources when you switched styles? Oh, we can go back to that one. Where is it? So I think for this one, the one thing I always loved is animation. Like I watch a lot of anime, and especially like Studio Ghibli backgrounds. I think I saw this documentary about I think his name was Katsuga Oga, who's doing these phenomenal backgrounds, and they sort of had this really amazing feel to it. And just looking at a lot of Japanese animation background, like for feature films in particular, they're just so incredible, and that was like a huge inspiration for me. I remember doing, especially about some Ghibli frames, I would do a study and I would close down the image and then I try to draw from memory inspiration from the color palette, the lighting, and do my own image with it, which I felt was really helpful. Do you have another question? Do you have a particular method you felt helped you learn most efficiently? I think the way to be most efficient with studies in particular is try to find something that's relevant to what you're trying to learn. Because a mistake I did early on is doing random studies of studying just a subject matter or maybe a photo you just like. And there's value in that, of course. But the way I think you make the most of it is, say, for instance, you're really trying to learn the anatomy of the face. Then it makes sense to do study of portraits, instead of drawing a flower or a landscape. And because if you do study of a subject you're trying to understand more, that you can connect them much more. And that was a mistake like I did early on, where I didn't think about that at all. So I think approaching it like that could really help. Been really burnt out after a big and difficult commission. Any tips for getting back on my feet and working again? Yeah, I think sometimes, that happens. Maybe it was like a lot of feedback or very difficult work. Um, I think that's where it's like, you just gotta like maybe draw a bit for yourself, take a bit of a break from commercial work and just do illustrations that you enjoy, if you can have that where you don't need to pick up work straight away. And just make sure that you have fun with it, because something I mentioned earlier in the presentation is sometimes as we do work, it's easy to get caught up in losing the joy sometimes because of feedback or whatever it might be. So maybe just a small break before you dive back into it. Can you share any tips that were game changers for you when you're working at Riot? Oh, there was so many. Let me see. I think for me in particular at Riot, just really thinking about like the light logic and the feel of the image and trying to answer these questions early in the process was pretty big because I sort of like I think prior to that I tried to do it to a degree but not to the same extent where we really tried to answer like what is the mood and emotion of the image before you dive into the rendering phase, which was super helpful. uh, cool. How long was your practice stage? Like how long did it take to make your fundamentals solid? um, So I was able to get my first job after trying to draw, learning to draw for 2 years, but I wouldn't say my fundamentals were solid. I think what I did is, I originally I'm a background painter. Like I love environments, and that's sort of always been my focus. So character illustration was never on the radar, or character design even. So I would say in terms of environment, after 2 years, I felt pretty comfortable with it. But and that's sort of the work I was doing. But as I kept working more, it's like, okay, I do want to move away from just drawing character, just environments. And I think even now, I do studies regularly. I feel like my figure work is not where I want it to be. Um, so I don't think it never feels. I think it'll never be enough, but it'll be good enough where you can do it for a living, but you can always do more. Cool. There's another question here. Unless, yeah. I know you mentioned your work from Riot bleeding into your personal work in your own time. How do you keep your own art, non-commercial, feeling fresh and different from your work aside from process? That was actually really hard on League of Legends because the style of League of Legends and what I like to do in my free time, if we go back to that slide, is where was it? Here is very day and night because uh, on League it's all about like trying to remove the brushstrokes and keeping it pretty smooth and very tight. But I love when it's a bit more graphical and a bit more chunky and a bit more simplistic. So particularly when doing splashes, I sort of struggle with finding that balance. And that's why when we started doing the Valorant work, it was like 100% up what I felt comfortable with, where it is more graphical, it's a bit more chunky, and that's where it's like, as we were doing this work, I was like, oh, this is cool. I kind of want to use it in my own work as well. And like, it became more of I'd say, merge between the two, and that made it actually a lot easier to not have such a stark contrast in the work I like to do in my own time and the commercial work. You mentioned tailoring your portfolio for a specific company, but how do you do that if you're applying for multiple companies? I think, yeah, I think that's a fair point. But I think if you really want to uh, work for say Riot, I would say really try to just focus on them and build a portfolio towards that, because it's not going to be as strong as if you try to build towards separate companies. You can have like maybe just a few specific pieces for Riot, and the rest is more broad that you can use for other companies. So that could also be a balance. Maybe like 40% is specifically for Riot, and the 60% is more generic, where you can send it anywhere else. Any good sources, book recommendations? Oh, I really love Framed Ink. It is amazing to read. It's easy to read. There's a lot of pictures, very little text, which I like personally. It's easy to pick up and see how you can make the most of the information. When you decide to merge layers together in a large illustration, like on the true damage Kiana. Um, it's this was a feedback I got from actually Esben, who was an illustrator on League of Legends as well, because he came across to my desk and he saw I was like on layer 500. He's like, man, you need to merge your layers because I didn't realize it at the time, but it was eating up so much time just trying to make a change on the image because you're like you have to pull out the right layer, you know. And I know some people like to work with layer masks, but I kind of just like to keep it flat. You know, you just duplicate the image in case you want to go back. But as soon as you add something to the image, you're happy with it. I just like to merge it. Would you recommend attending a school such as FCD or Sin Studio once one has saved enough? Uh, I know of FCD, but I don't know anything about Sin Studio. I am self-taught, so I never did any big budget school. I remember I looked at FCD, but the price range was too much out of what I had. Um, and I think you can. I would say that the main thing is like how how much self discipline do you have? Like, do you feel like you need a teacher to help you push you all the time? Because to find the information to learn how to draw in whatever way you want, there's you can probably spend $100, $500 maybe, and get all the gum roads, and you should be set. But the difficult part is like how do you when you get stuck on a task, how do you understand certain things? But if you have I would say, self-discipline to do it, I think you can totally save that money for maybe something else. But if you feel like you're the type of person that maybe you do need someone to help you regularly make sure you do the work, then I would recommend going to a school. I think there's many options. I know in particular that I can recommend one because we hired a lot of people from it, which is a French school called New Edge. I don't know what the teachers are teaching, but the students come out amazing. So, and I don't think it's probably the same range as FCD. I don't know Sin Studio, but I don't know if it's specifically for French-speaking students, but we hired a lot of people from that school, and they're amazing. So I can recommend that one. Um hey Ati, did you have any knowledge from law school randomly help at all in your time as well? No, I was so early in my career that it was never really useful, and I wasn't, towards the end I wasn't really paying attention. Unfortunately, maybe I should have. I think I probably could have used that knowledge to some degree, uh, but yeah. Also curious if you tackled something that's way out of your comfort zone while working, and how did you manage to work through it? Yes, actually I did. So particularly, like, we can go back to do we have here? Uh, so the one thing that, like, because at Riot, I primarily was hired to do environment concept work on Valorant. But throughout my time, I sort of felt that um, I was really struggling with figure work. And I knew that doing environment work, I was never really going to deal with it because I never got forced to deal with it. So I actually opted in for a switch to do more illustration work, and a lot of my splashes. What I did was I tried to uh, I wanted to have the figure as clear as possible, particularly the face. In a lot of my illustrations, I wanted the face to be clear because it's so hard to draw a face. And by doing that, it's like, because this is going to go live, there's no reason I'm not going to ship the splash. I have to make it look right. And luckily, I had such amazing coworkers. They always helped me when I got stuck, and I got stuck a lot. So, yeah, I just like when I personally like when I put myself in situations where uh, the only way forward is like you have to succeed. You cannot fail. And because I feel like in situations like that, that's when you really pull out whatever extra there is in you as an artist to really make the image work. Uh, Thanks, Ati. Always nice to hear about your career and thoughts. Thank you so much. Uh, what do you think is the best way of approaching learning so it's an intelligent way? I mentioned it a bit earlier, but like focusing your studies around whatever you're focusing on at the time. If you're working on anatomy, do all your studies based around anatomy. Don't worry so much about colors or perspective. Just focusing on whatever you're studying at that time. Uh, Hey everyone. Layers from a file which oh. Do you think it's possible to do art as a freelance side career to another career? In my case, medicine. I really enjoy both, but I'm not sure if there's anything else from my art but a hobby. I mean, I think of course, there's always going to be like, you know, uh, you basically what you need to find in this project that allows for a longer deadline, and there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to do it. It's just really up to you, and when you find someone to work with, to just really let them be aware of that it is, you do need the extra time because it is in your off hours. So as you do work, you just need to count that in the deadline. It needs to be further away. So both of you are aware of that from the start, and I really don't see a problem with it. And maybe after a few commissions or years, maybe you feel like, hey, I actually do want to turn this more than a hobby. So who knows? Uh, oh, thanks, Abby. I'm gonna try and do more YouTube. It's just been a bit crazy lately. We got our last three questions. How do you start thumbnailing for a splash illustration? How much of the idea is clear in your head when going into the splash art? I have a few videos actually on the YouTube channel where it goes into how I approach it, but we try to do something that is called green light, where we try to get the essence. Actually, let me see if I can pull it up here. Let me pull up on a separate frame. Because it's a process that they developed in the Splash team where we try to get the essence of the image really early on to just let me see, where is it? I did it for a colleague. So if we pull it here, uh, where yeah. So we try to get it in this stage to answer all the major questions. This is like I wrote color rough, but it basically green light where we want, if you squint your eyes, you should sort of like get the whole vibe of the image, and the earlier you can get this, the better. Because if this works, from there it's going to be pretty straightforward to make the image come together. It's just sculpting out the form, the lights, but you want to get this as early as you can, and I try to get as much of it as in the thumbnail originally, but you really refine it in the green light stage. Do you approach characters' environment differently? Um, I find with characters, I think about the planes, but with landscape, it seems overwhelming. Should I think more of shade? Yes. So, this one is super, super interesting question because I noticed particularly like this is something I saw with my own work, and I see generally like character designers are excellent at sculpting form, but they cannot suggest it. Which means, when you do environment, it's a lot of suggesting. And vice versa, environment artists, they're great at suggesting form because all environment work is just suggesting shapes and forms, but they often struggle with sculpting it out when stuff needs to be exact. And I think, this is something where it's very rare you can find someone who can do a bit of both. But for me, I started as a background artist and then I did the switch, so it sort of became a bit easier to I sort of just flip a switch in the brain depending on what I'm trying to approach and sort of go from there. Uh, what would you do when you encounter materials that were difficult to render? I do a lot of studies actually. Here, even for Akali, like the smoke and the metals and just I try to practice as much as I can, and it could be more simple, could be faster. I think for Katarina, Her hair. Oh, I did so many studies of her hair, or how to draw hair, because I knew it was going to be pretty difficult to make it look right. So I spent a lot of time just doing all these studies, trying to find way of how do I simplify it in the image itself. So that's my best solve whenever whenever something gets difficult. How did your normal day look like when you started learning? Um, so I started with, I think when I first started drawing, I was drawing for about 2 hours a day, and that was super exhausting. After those 2 hours, like, oh my god, I've drawn all day. I need a break, which is fine because I think with art, it's like, you have to build up to endurance. Just like working out, you can't go heavyweight straight away. You have to like slowly build that up. And over time, you can add, maybe 3 hours and then maybe 4 hours, but it's only you who can decide how much you want to add to that. Uh, Thank you, Oliver, for the really kind words. How do you personally keep art fun in the long run and avoid burnout? So, I just think the act of painting is super fun. I think burnout is I haven't run into it yet, so I don't know how to balance that. But I think as long as you try to maintain the joy in what you do, even though sometimes it get difficult, maybe with feedback and stuff. Uh, and try to stay as positive as you can. Try to balance out the work with other things. With gaming or whatever it is. I think you'll be good. Uh, and yes, we are hiring at Evar. Uh, when working on personal piece, how do you define the direction of what you want to paint instead of ending up with maybe this, maybe that indecisive stage? Hope this makes sense. Yeah. So this will be the last question. I think there's one more, and then we'll sort of wrap up. But I think this is something I try to do really early on in the process. I also learned this from someone when I was working on Valorant. Is that try to decide, you're basically trying to art direct your image, and for me, what I try to do before you even start painting is like, what is the emotional feel you want the piece to have, what is the reaction you're hoping that will come out of it? Is it happiness? Is it just whatever that is before you paint? Because once you decide on that, and then when you uh, start painting, is like you try to stick to that vision. You try to pick a color palette that supports it. You try to compose it in a way that supports it. All that stuff comes later once you know ahead of time what you're trying to achieve. Uh, oh, I missed. Oh, uh, being self-taught, which resources made a big difference on your art skill? I think it's just some tutorials I bought early on that were out there. There was an outsourced studio called Massive Black. They were linked to the forum conceptart.org, and they were a gold mine to me. Back then it was a lot of digital painting tutorials, and they were like the tutorials, so they were super super good. Um, Last one from Sora. Uh, we can do Radog and then we wrap up. Hi Ate, I want to say I love your work. I'm a teenage artist and I hope and you're one of my biggest inspirations to me. I hope I get to be as good as you one day. Any key advice to give? Thank you first of all for the very kind words. I think the main thing is, have fun. Always have fun. Think of art as exercising. You sort of need to do it regularly, and over time, try to increase the difficulty. You can't do the same exercise all the time with the same weights. It's just the same with art. Increase the difficulty in sense of like maybe the perspective, maybe the lighting. Always try to up the bar in how you approach an image because you're gonna find new problems to solve, and I think that's really gonna help you develop. Um, And Radog, in general, I'm afraid to finish my pieces. Any advice on this? I mean, I'm just the type of guy who doesn't finish stuff because I struggle at the end of any single art piece. I think you just gotta sit down and do it. You know, like if you look at some of the illustration work, it's just a lot of time that goes into it. You know, and uh, you just need to get that time in, put on an audiobook, and just have fun with it. And Yeah, I do. That's why I do so much books. I just once you get into the render zone, you can just really have fun with it. Uh, so thank you so much everyone for sitting through this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there was something valuable to take away from it. And enjoy the rest of the Lightbox convention. And have fun with your craft. And have a great Saturday night or Sunday morning. I don't know where you all are